From forcing veteran MMA fighters to put their lives in serious danger, to Conor McGregor planning to drop his gloves despite the BKFC controversy, here's why the Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship will be the end of combat sports. For starters, the fights are pretty freaking dangerous. Sure, BKFC has some of the biggest MMA veterans playing under it, but let's be real, these guys have taken some serious damage over their careers. They can get injured very easily, and BKFC is the last place they should go to get a paycheck. The fight for long-term health benefits in MMA, specifically in the UFC, has been happening for quite some time now. But BKFC's business model is exploiting the desperation of aging fighters as they're selling their fights by solely relying on how dangerous they get.
Now it's Richmond turning, landing. Rico's coming forward. Overhand right lands for Mike Richmond.
Gloves are a no-go, and fighters do whatever it takes to keep fighting. If you tuned into Knucklemania 2, you'd know exactly what I'm talking about. Julian Lane was up against the monstrous Mike Perry, and though Lane stayed tough through the 5-round battle, he got a brutal cut to his left eye.
Big uppercut. Perry lands big on the overhand right.
I mean, the man couldn't even see, and the fight had to end right there. No wonder the BKFC is being dissed left and right, as Association of Boxing Commission's president, Mike Mazzulli, agrees to the sport's danger. He called BKFC out for taking advantage of former MMA fighters, but he's not the only one giving the organization the side eye. The most unlikely person has imperfections to point out, and it's none other than Dana White. He entirely slammed their business model, and trust me, it's not a good look at all. Sure, the BKFC has been taking some heavy hits, as the big man called BKFC out for its lack of concern for fighter safety at a press conference. Now let's be real, it takes a lot to make Dana White seem like the good guy, especially when it comes to labor relations. I mean, the man has brought his own league into the block, called the Power Slap, and is just as ridiculous as BKFC. Being the brainchild of none other than the UFC president, this sport pits two men or women against each other, and they have a slap fight until one of them gives up. There was a major backlash in the beginning, but it was eventually given the green light by the Nevada Athletic Commission. Just like the BKFC, the fighters go in with bare hands, and the damage is just as excruciating. In the premiere episode, Alex Alsbury was up against Michael Smith, and Smith practically sliced his opponent's lip open with a brutal slap. The fight was immediately stopped by a doctor, but right after that, Dwayne Crespo faced Matthew Strickland, and on the very first hit, Strickland was knocked out cold. Despite the unbelievable dangers of the sport, some of the biggest names are backing the sport up. For instance, even Stefon Diggs posted the first episode on his Instagram story featuring his creative commentary, and as Conor McGregor teased becoming the Joe Rogan of Power Slap, he gave the league the kind of glory it does not deserve. But the Power Slap League and BKFC have one major thing in common. Both sports were on the verge of being illegal. BKFC is trying to ride along with the UFC, modeling itself as an attachment to the previously established organization, but the sport has a very uncomfortable history. Their first event was held in Wyoming, of all places, which only agreed to host the bout after 28 other states passed. And get this, the card that night was the first public bare-knuckle boxing event held in the US since an 1889 bout in Mississippi. And that's not all. The 1889 fight even resulted in the arrests of both fighters, which is an awful part of bare-knuckle fighting history. The combat sport was made legal once again after a very long time. And even then, the BKFC still has a lot to answer for. But past fights tell you enough about the risks involved with bare-knuckle fighting, and this bout left fans gaping at their screens. That's right, Charissa Sigala shockingly broke her leg in the BKFC Knucklemania 3, and viewers were taken back because while gnarly injuries in bare-knuckle boxing are common, it's not every day you'll see someone breaking their leg in BKFC fights, especially since your opponent can't even punch you below the waist. But that's exactly what happened to Charissa Sigala, as she was up against Jamie Henshaw at BKFC Knucklemania 3. Henshaw was in control from the start, landing some heavy shots that left Sigala reeling. But it was a perfect overhand right that really did the damage, sending Sigala crashing to the canvas. As if that wasn't bad enough, her right leg got caught underneath her body, causing it to snap in half. It was a full-on horror scene, and while Sigala looked like she wanted to get up and keep fighting, her leg wouldn't let her, so the ref had no choice but to stop the bout. Had it not been for that, she might have fought until she fractured a few more bones, because that's just what BKFC does. While the examples are right there for all to see, Some fighters believe that bare-knuckle fighting is safer than MMA, and Chad Mendes even managed to convince his wife about BKFC's safety. The man is known for his killer takedowns and ground and pound, swapped out his gloves for some hand wraps, and as he got ready to wreak havoc in the ring, he was convinced that BKFC is safer than MMA. No one would blame you for thinking he's lost it, but the man had his reasons, and he didn't think there was a massive difference between them. Sure, any combat sport comes with risks, but with fewer ways to attack and defend in a boxing match, Mendes believed he'd be entering a safer competitive environment. Of course, not everyone is on board with this risky move. Mendes admitted that his wife had some serious reservations, especially about him getting back into the ring with no gloves to protect his hands. But he was determined to make a name for himself in this new sport, and he wanted to prove that he was still a force to be reckoned with. Of course, his wife got on board eventually, since she's ready to support whatever he decides. During his time in the UFC, Mendes showed off his striking skills by winning 6 fights via early stoppage from punches, and after making a name for himself in MMA, he was ready to make the shift to the bare-knuckle way. In his mind, the rounds are a lot shorter, and without the glove, he's only got half an inch of less padding to deal with. The difference isn't a lot, but he pointed out how MMA involves some pretty dangerous stuff too, like head kicks, big knees, and elbows, and none of that stuff is there to complicate BKFC fights. But there's a bigger reason for BKFC's recent hype. Blissfully disregarding the dangers of the sport, Conor McGregor is about to drop the gloves. No wonder the BKFC is making headlines all over the place. The man stirred up the combat sports world as he appeared in the ring at BKFC 41 in Broomfield, Colorado. He confronted Mike Perry, who just scored a thunderous TKO victory over former UFC middleweight champion Luke Rockhold. And it wasn't just any ordinary win. It was only the second round of their headlining fight, and Perry punched Rockhold in the face so hard that the man lost a tooth. In fact, you could see the tooth flying in the air.
Good left hand from Rockhold. Right hand right back from Mike Perry.
And since the damage stopped the fight right away, Perry scored the win. It was only after the event was over that BKFC president David Feldman explained the damage. And as it turns out, Rockhold damaged several of his teeth. He also posted a video showing a gash on his lip being stitched up. But despite the awfully violent fight, McGregor loved the atmosphere and even hinted at a possible future in the bare-knuckle boxing world. The Irishman shared his excitement on Instagram, stating that he would be open to competing in the sport and taking on Perry himself. Now, that's a slippery slope, because big names like McGregor joining the BKFC would take all of the focus away from just how poorly planned it is. But as it turns out, fighters are willing to overlook the risk and are ready to jump into the ring for the thrill. So there you have it, from Conor McGregor hinting at fighting for the BKFC to the organization's model being extremely dangerous for fighters. Those were all the reasons why BKFC will be the end of combat sports.